The lights of Galactic Hub Station Meridian flickered in their usual pattern, as thousands of beings from across the galaxy moved through its massive corridors. The station floated in neutral space between three major star systems and served as one of the busiest transit points in the known universe. Ships came and went every few minutes, carrying passengers of every imaginable species to destinations scattered across countless worlds. Gate 47 stood near the eastern wing of the station, a specialized checkpoint that led to the restricted military zones of human-controlled space. Only those with proper authorization could pass through, and security remained tight at all hours. Krixtal stood behind the scanning console at Gate 47, running routine checks on passengers as they presented their credentials. The Valerian had worked this post for 3 years, and the job had become almost automatic. Krixtal's blue crystalline skin reflected the glow of the console screens, and delicate antennae twitched slightly whenever something caught attention. The agent took pride in maintaining perfect security records, never allowing unauthorized personnel through the checkpoint. Today seemed like any other day, with the usual mix of military personnel, contractors, and authorized visitors passing through without incident. The line moved steadily until Krixtal noticed something unusual. A young human girl, no more than 10 years old by human standards, stood in the queue alone. She wore a dark jacket covered in colorful patches, carried a small backpack, and held a data pad in her hands. Her skin was dark brown, her hair pulled back in neat braids, and her expression remained completely calm. Most children traveling through the station showed excitement or nervousness, chattering to their parents or guardians about the journey ahead. This girl simply waited patiently, occasionally glancing at her data pad, showing no signs of distress or confusion. Krixtal's antennae perked up with concern. Where were her parents? Why was she traveling alone to a military installation? The agent pulled up the girl's ticket information as she approached the checkpoint. The destination read, Firebase Olympus, one of the most secure human military bases in the sector. Her credentials appeared legitimate at first glance, but something felt wrong about the entire situation. Children did not simply travel alone to classified military installations without raising questions. The girl reached the checkpoint and handed over her identification card without being asked. Her movements were precise and confident, nothing like the typical fumbling of a child. Krixtal scanned the card and watched as the system processed her information. Maya Collins, age 10, destination Firebase Olympus, clearance level verified. Everything checked out on the surface, but Krixtal had learned to trust instincts over computer readouts. The agent looked at Maya carefully, noting the strange patches on her jacket that could be some kind of gang symbols or coded messages. Maya met Krixtal's gaze without flinching. Most children avoided eye contact with alien species they found intimidating, but this girl showed no fear whatsoever. She simply waited for clearance to board, her posture relaxed and patient. Krixtal's mind raced through possibilities. Perhaps she was a courier carrying illegal items. Maybe she had been trained by smugglers to appear innocent while transporting contraband. The fact that her destination was a human military base could mean she was involved in some kind of espionage operation. Krixtal made a decision and pressed the alert button hidden beneath the console. Within seconds, Security Chief Vorn appeared from the nearby office, his massive Craxian frame towering over the checkpoint area. Vorn had 4 powerful arms, gray-scaled skin, and small dark eyes that missed nothing. He approached the checkpoint with 2 security deputies following close behind. Krixtal gestured toward Maya and spoke quietly in Galactic Common, explaining the concerns about a child traveling alone to a restricted military facility. Vorn looked down at Maya, who returned his gaze without showing any reaction. The security chief asked her in heavily accented English where her parents were. Maya replied calmly that her father was waiting for her at Firebase Olympus. Vorn asked why she was traveling alone, and she explained that her father worked there and she was going to visit him. The explanation sounded reasonable enough, but Vorn shared Krixtal's concerns. Something about the situation felt wrong, even if they could not identify exactly what. The security chief made a gesture, and the 2 deputies moved to either side of Maya. Vorn explained politely that they needed to verify her credentials and ask a few more questions. Maya nodded without protest and allowed herself to be escorted to a nearby holding area. She did not cry or call for help or show any signs of the panic that most children would display in such a situation. She simply walked between the deputies as if being detained by alien security forces was a perfectly normal part of her day. Other passengers in line began to notice the commotion. A few humans in the queue exchanged concerned glances but said nothing. The alien passengers paid little attention, accustomed to seeing security checks and detentions in busy transit stations. Crystal watched Maya disappear into the holding area and felt a mixture of relief and uncertainty. The agent had followed proper protocol, but something nagged at the back of the mind. What if this was simply a misunderstanding? What if the girl really was just visiting her father? Vaughn returned to the checkpoint a few minutes later and confirmed that Maya would be held until they could verify her story. The security chief planned to contact Firebase Olympus directly and request confirmation of her travel authorization. Until then, she would remain in the holding area under supervision. Crystal nodded and returned to processing other passengers, but concentration wavered. The agent kept thinking about the calm expression on Maya's face, the way she had accepted detention without resistance, and those strange patches on her jacket. In the holding area, Maya sat on a simple bench and continued reading something on her datapad. A security monitor assigned to watch her offered food and water, but she politely declined both. She seemed perfectly content to wait, showing no signs of boredom or distress. The monitor, a young Zenthi named Dal, found her composure unsettling. Most detainees showed some emotional response, whether anger, fear, or confusion. This human child simply sat quietly, as if she had all the time in the world. Vaughn began the process of contacting Firebase Olympus through official channels. The base's automated response system acknowledged Maya's credentials as valid, but provided no additional information about why a child was traveling alone. Frustrated, Vaughn decided to send a formal inquiry through diplomatic channels requesting human military liaison officers to explain the situation. Such requests typically took several hours to process, which meant Maya would be stuck in holding for quite some time. The security chief hoped this would all turn out to be a simple misunderstanding, but years of experience had taught him that simple situations rarely stayed simple for long. 2 hours passed since Maya's detention began, and the situation had not improved. Security Chief Vaughn sat in his office reviewing the case files on his computer terminal, while waiting for responses from Firebase Olympus. The automated acknowledgement from the base had arrived within minutes, but no human officers had replied to his formal inquiry. This silence made him increasingly uncomfortable. Perhaps the girl really was involved in something illegal, and the base was preparing an official response. Or perhaps human military bureaucracy simply moved slowly. Either way, Vaughn needed answers before he could release her. Maya remained in the holding area, still reading her datapad with the same calm expression she had worn since her detention. Dal, the Zenthi monitor, had been watching her for the entire 2 hours, and reported that she had not moved except to shift her sitting position once. She had not asked to use the bathroom, had not requested to contact anyone, and had not complained about being held. Dal found this behavior deeply strange and had mentioned it to Vaughn twice already. The security chief agreed but had no explanation for it. Meanwhile, word of the detention had spread through the checkpoint area. A human merchant named Greg Palmer had been waiting in line behind Maya when security pulled her aside. Greg had continued through the checkpoint without incident, but the scene bothered him. After clearing security, he made his way to the main concourse and then circled back to the Gate 47 area. He approached one of the security deputies and asked what had happened to the young girl he had seen detained earlier. The deputy, a junior Craxian officer named Torque, explained that the child was being held for verification of her credentials. Greg frowned and asked why a child would need verification beyond the standard security scan. Torque hesitated, then explained that she was traveling alone to a restricted military installation, which raised security concerns. Greg's frown deepened and he asked to speak with whoever was in charge of the situation. Vaughn emerged from his office when informed that a human wanted to discuss the detention. Greg introduced himself and explained that he had witnessed Maya being taken into custody. The merchant told Vaughn that human children frequently traveled alone to visit parents stationed at military bases throughout human space. It was common practice in human culture, especially among military families. Children as young as 7 or 8 regularly made such trips, supervised remotely by base personnel who monitored their travel through encrypted communications. Vaughn listened politely, but remained unconvinced. He explained that regardless of human customs, the situation appeared suspicious to trained security personnel. Maya's extreme composure, her solo travel to a classified facility, and her young age all combined to create reasonable grounds for additional screening. Greg argued that what appeared suspicious to alien eyes was simply normal behavior for a human military dependent. Children raised in military families learned independence and self-reliance from an early age. They were taught to remain calm in stressful situations and to follow security protocols without complaint. The conversation grew heated, though both Vorn and Greg maintained professional tones. Other humans passing through the checkpoint overheard the discussion, and several stopped to listen. A few voiced support for Greg's position, explaining their own experiences with military family travel. One woman mentioned that her daughter had been making solo trips to visit her father at orbital stations since age 9. Another man described growing up on various military installations and traveling between them regularly as a child. Vorn appreciated the cultural context these humans provided, but his primary responsibility was station security. He could not simply release a detained minor based on anecdotal evidence about human customs. He needed official confirmation from Firebase Olympus that Maya was expected and authorized to travel alone. Until that confirmation arrived, she would remain in holding regardless of how normal her situation might be within human culture. Krixtal joined the discussion, explaining to the gathered humans that the decision to detain Maya had been based on standard security protocols. The Valerian agent described the observations that had triggered the alert, including Maya's unusual composure, her solo travel status, and the patches on her jacket that could potentially be coded symbols. Several humans actually laughed at this last point, and one explained that military children commonly wore unit patches from ships or bases where their parents had served. The patches were marks of pride, not gang symbols or secret codes. Krixtal's antennae drooped with embarrassment, but the agent maintained professional dignity. Cultural differences were real, and what seemed obvious to humans might appear suspicious to other species. The Valerian had acted in good faith based on training and experience. If that training proved inadequate for dealing with human cultural practices, then the training needed improvement, not the agent who followed it. Greg softened his tone and thanked Krixtal for taking security seriously. He explained that he understood the difficulty of monitoring a station where hundreds of species passed through daily, each with their own customs and behaviors. However, he urged the security team to contact Firebase Olympus immediately and expedite Maya's release. The girl had already been detained for 2 hours, and her father was likely wondering why she had not arrived yet. Vorn assured Greg that official channels had been contacted and that they were waiting for a response. The security chief explained that military installations often took time to respond to external inquiries due to security procedures and chain-of-command protocols. Greg accepted this explanation reluctantly and asked if he could wait in the area until the situation was resolved. Vorn saw no reason to refuse and directed him to a waiting area near the checkpoint. Back in the holding area, Maya finally looked up from her datapad when Dal brought her a drink of water, despite her earlier refusal. She accepted it this time and thanked the Zenthi monitor politely. Dal asked her if she was worried about being detained, and Maya shook her head. She explained that her father had taught her that sometimes security personnel needed to verify things, and the best response was to be patient and cooperative. Getting upset or demanding immediate release would only make the situation worse and take longer to resolve. Dal found this answer remarkably mature for a 10-year-old. The monitor asked Maya what she had been reading on her datapad for the past 2 hours. Maya turned the device around to show a book about ancient Earth history, specifically focusing on naval exploration during the age of sailing ships. She explained that her father loved history and had gotten her interested in it as well. She particularly enjoyed reading about explorers who traveled to unknown places, facing danger and uncertainty with courage and determination. The Zenthi monitor smiled at this and remarked that Maya seemed very brave herself. The girl shrugged and said she did not think waiting in a holding area required much bravery. Real bravery was what her father did, commanding ships in dangerous situations and making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Sitting quietly and reading a book was easy by comparison. This conversation was interrupted by a sudden alert on Dal's communication device. The monitor checked the message and then looked at Maya with wide eyes. A priority communication had just arrived from Firebase Olympus, and it was not a standard diplomatic response. Someone very important wanted to speak with Security Chief Vorn immediately. Dal hurried out of the holding area to inform the chief, leaving Maya alone with her book once again. Vorn received the alert and felt his stomach tighten with apprehension. Priority communications from military installations usually meant something significant had happened. He hoped Maya's detention had not triggered some kind of diplomatic incident. The security chief took a deep breath and accepted the incoming transmission at his desk terminal. The holographic display activated, and Vorn found himself looking at a human male in military uniform. The insignia on the uniform made Vorn's blood run cold, and he suddenly understood that this situation had just become much more complicated than a simple detention of a suspicious traveler. The holographic image resolved into crystal clarity, revealing a man who commanded immediate respect through presence alone. Fleet Admiral Marcus Collins stood in what appeared to be a military command center, with tactical displays glowing behind him and personnel moving purposefully in the background. He wore the dark blue uniform of Earth's Stellar Navy, his jacket decorated with ribbons and medals that spoke of extensive combat experience and distinguished service. His skin was the same dark brown as Maya's, his hair cut military short with gray showing at the temples, and his eyes held the sharp focus of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions. Vorn straightened instinctively, recognizing the rank insignia even though he had never met a human fleet admiral before. The security chief's forearms tensed and he struggled to find appropriate words. Admiral Collins spoke first, his voice calm and measured but carrying an undertone of steel that suggested carefully controlled emotion. He asked Vorn to provide a status report on his daughter Maya, and the way he emphasized the word daughter made it clear that he already knew exactly what had happened. The Craxian security chief explained the situation as professionally as possible, detailing the observations that had led to Maya's detention. He mentioned her solo travel status, her calm demeanor, her young age, and the restricted nature of her destination. Vorn emphasized that all actions had been taken in accordance with standard security protocols, and that Maya had been treated with respect throughout her detention. He assured the Admiral that his daughter was safe and comfortable in a supervised holding area. Admiral Collins listened without interrupting, his expression remaining neutral throughout Vorn's explanation. When the security chief finished, the Admiral thanked him for his thoroughness in a tone that somehow managed to be both sincere and deeply unsettling. He explained that Maya had been staying with her aunt on the civilian side of the galaxy for the past 6 months, while he completed a deployment. She was traveling to Firebase Olympus because his deployment had ended early, and he wanted his daughter with him. The situation was entirely normal for a military family, with all appropriate authorizations filed through proper channels. Vorn felt his anxiety increase despite the Admiral's calm tone. He apologized for any inconvenience and stated that Maya would be released immediately. Admiral Collins acknowledged this but did not end the communication. Instead, he asked about the timeline of events. How long had Maya been detained? When had Firebase Olympus been contacted? Why had it taken over 2 hours for his command staff to be notified of the situation? The security chief answered each question honestly, explaining the automated response from the base and the delay in escalating through diplomatic channels. Admiral Collins nodded slowly, and Vorn noticed that the background activity in the command center had increased. More personnel were moving around and several officers appeared to be monitoring the conversation. The Admiral explained that his daughter carried emergency contact codes that should have triggered immediate notification to his staff. The fact that these codes had not been recognized suggested a gap in cross-species security protocols. Vorn had not been aware of any emergency codes in Maya's credentials. He pulled up her file on a secondary screen while continuing the conversation. The Admiral was correct. Buried in the metadata of her identification were several priority contact codes that should have alerted Firebase Olympus command staff immediately. The automated system had verified her credentials, but had failed to recognize the significance of these codes. This was indeed a procedural failure, and Vorn knew that it would need to be addressed. Admiral Collins requested to speak with the agent who had initially flagged his daughter. Vorn hesitated, not wanting to expose Krikstal to what might become a very unpleasant conversation. However, refusing a fleet admiral's request seemed like an even worse idea. The security chief left his office and found Krixtal still at the Gate 47 checkpoint. The Valerian agent's antennae were already drooping with anxiety. Having heard through station communications that someone important was asking questions about the detention, Krixtal followed Vorn back to the office with obvious reluctance. The agent stood before the holographic display, looking up at Admiral Collins with clear apprehension. The Admiral regarded the Valerian carefully for a long moment before speaking. When he did speak, his words surprised both Krixtal and Vorn. He thanked the agent for following security protocols and maintaining vigilance at the checkpoint. He stated that security personnel who took their duties seriously were valuable assets to any station, and he appreciated Krixtal's attention to detail. The Valerian agent's antennae lifted slightly with relief, but Admiral Collins was not finished. He began explaining human military family culture in detail, describing how children of service members were raised to be independent and self-reliant. Military families moved frequently, sometimes across vast distances of space. Children learned to adapt to new environments, to travel alone when necessary, and to remain calm in unfamiliar or stressful situations. These were not signs of suspicious training, but rather the natural result of growing up in a military environment. Krixtal listened intently as the Admiral continued. He explained that the patches on Maya's jacket were unit insignia, from ships he had commanded throughout his career. His daughter wore them with pride, just as millions of other military children across human space wore similar patches. They represented family history and tradition, not criminal affiliation. Her calm demeanor was not the result of espionage training, but rather years of being taught that panic and drama accomplished nothing useful. The Admiral's explanation was educational rather than accusatory, and Krixtal began to understand the depth of the cultural misunderstanding. Everything that had seemed suspicious through Valerian eyes was completely normal through human cultural lens. The agent had acted correctly based on training and experience, but had lacked the cultural context necessary to interpret Maya's behavior accurately. This was not a failure of diligence, but a failure of education. However, Admiral Collins shifted his tone when addressing the procedural issues. While he appreciated the security diligence, he pointed out that his daughter had been held for over 2 hours without proper notification to her emergency contacts. The codes in her credentials were specifically designed to prevent exactly this kind of extended detention. When a military-dependent minor was flagged for additional screening, protocols required immediate contact with their sponsor's command structure. This had not happened, and the Admiral wanted to understand why. Vorn accepted responsibility for the oversight, explaining that the station's security systems had verified Maya's credentials, but had not been programmed to recognize human military emergency contact codes. This represented a gap in their protocols that needed to be corrected. The Admiral agreed and stated that he would be filing an official report with the Galactic Transit Authority recommending improvements to how stations handle unaccompanied minors with military credentials. Station Administrator Qual, who had been monitoring the situation from the operations center, joined the communication at this point. The Zenthi administrator apologized profusely to Admiral Collins for the procedural failures and assured him that immediate steps would be taken to improve protocols. Qual promised a full review of security procedures and enhanced cultural training for all station personnel. The administrator also offered to personally escort Maya to her shuttle and ensure priority boarding. Admiral Collins accepted these assurances, but made it clear that his official report would be filed regardless. This was not about punishment, but about preventing similar incidents at other stations across the galaxy. If Maya could be detained for over 2 hours due to cultural misunderstanding and procedural gaps, the same thing could happen to other children. Improving the system would benefit everyone who traveled through galactic transit stations. The Admiral then requested a private communication link with his daughter. Vorn immediately arranged for Maya to be brought to a secure communication terminal in an adjacent room. The security chief Krixtal and Administrator Call tactfully withdrew to give father and daughter privacy. Through the office window they could see Maya's face light up with genuine joy when she saw her father on the screen. It was the first strong emotion she had displayed since her detention began. The private conversation lasted about 5 minutes. When it ended, Maya emerged from the room with a slight smile on her face. She thanked Vorn and Krikstal politely for doing their jobs and said she understood that they had been trying to keep the station safe. This grace from a child who had every right to be upset struck both security officers deeply. Krikstal's antennae quivered with emotion, and Vorn found himself impressed despite the uncomfortable situation. Administrator Call personally escorted Maya to a VIP lounge reserved for high-ranking officials and their families. The Zenthi administrator ensured she had refreshments and entertainment while waiting for her shuttle. Call also assigned a diplomatic aide to stay with her, both as a courtesy and as a precaution against any further incidents. The administrator wanted absolutely no additional problems before Maya safely departed for Firebase Olympus. News of the incident spread through Meridian Station faster than any official communication could travel. Station personnel gossiped about the detention and its resolution, and the story evolved with each retelling. By the time the story reached the commercial sectors, it had transformed from a routine security matter into a tale of a fleet admiral's daughter being mistreated by overzealous security forces. The actual facts were less dramatic, but facts rarely competed well with compelling narratives in the gossip. Networks that connected station workers across departments. Greg Palmer heard several versions of the story as he waited near Gate 47. Some accounts portrayed Krikstal as incompetent, others as malicious, and a few as simply following bad protocols. Greg knew the truth was more nuanced, having witnessed the actual detention and spoken with the security personnel involved. He felt sympathy for Krikstal, who had made an honest judgment call based on limited cultural knowledge. The Valerian agent had not acted with malice but with caution, which was exactly what security personnel were supposed to do. The human merchant made his way to the VIP lounge where Maya now waited. The diplomatic aide at the door initially tried to prevent his entry, but Greg explained that he had witnessed the detention and wanted to check on the girl's well-being. After a brief consultation with Administrator Qual, the aide allowed Greg inside. He found Maya sitting comfortably on a cushioned bench, once again reading her data pad with the same focused attention she had shown throughout her detention. Greg introduced himself and asked if she was okay. Maya looked up from her book and smiled, assuring him that she was fine. She seemed genuinely unbothered by the experience, treating it as a minor inconvenience rather than a traumatic event. Greg sat down nearby and asked if this kind of thing happened often. Maya shrugged and explained that she had been stopped for additional screening a few times before, though never detained for quite so long. Security personnel at various stations sometimes reacted with concern when they saw a child traveling alone to military installations. The merchant found her attitude remarkable. Most children would be upset or frightened after being held by alien security forces for 2 hours. Maya simply accepted it as one of those things that happened sometimes. Greg asked if her father had been angry about the situation. Maya shook her head and said her father understood that security personnel had jobs to do. He was not angry at the agents, just disappointed that the station's protocols had not worked properly. There was a difference between making a mistake and failing to follow procedures correctly. This distinction impressed Greg, suggesting that Maya had learned to think about situations with nuance unusual for her age. He asked what she planned to do when she reached Firebase Olympus. Maya's face brightened as she described her plans. Her father had promised to show her the new ships that had arrived at the base during his deployment. She was particularly excited about touring a heavy cruiser that incorporated some revolutionary engine designs. She loved learning about spacecraft engineering and hoped to study it formally when she was older. Their conversation continued for another 20 minutes, ranging across topics from ship design to Maya's favorite books, to the challenges of maintaining friendships when you moved frequently. Greg found himself genuinely enjoying the discussion. Maya was articulate, curious, and thoughtful in ways that reminded him of adult conversations rather than typical exchanges with children. He mentioned this observation and Maya laughed. She explained that spending so much time around military personnel had taught her to express herself clearly and think before speaking. Meanwhile, back in the security offices, Vorn conducted a formal review of the incident with his entire team. He pulled up Maya's credentials on the main display and showed them the emergency contact codes that should have triggered immediate notification. The codes were there, properly formatted and completely valid, but the station's security system had not been programmed to recognize their significance. This was not a failure by Krikstal or any individual agent, but a systemic gap in how the station processed credentials from human military dependents. Krikstal sat quietly during the review, processing everything that had been learned. The Valerian agent reflected on assumptions made about Maya's behavior. Her calm demeanor had seemed suspicious because Valerian children were emotionally expressive and would never remain so composed in a detention scenario. Her solo travel had seemed dangerous because Valerians kept children under close supervision until adulthood. Even her confident posture had seemed wrong because young Valerians were taught to show deference and uncertainty rather than self-assurance. Every observation that had triggered concern was filtered through Valerian cultural expectations. Admiral Collins had explained human military culture clearly, but Krikstal now understood that the issue went deeper than just military families. Humans in general seemed to raise their children differently than most other species. They valued independence, encouraged self-reliance, and taught their young to handle situations that other species would consider inappropriate for children. This was not wrong, just different, but different in ways that could easily be misinterpreted as suspicious. Vorn announced that he was implementing immediate changes to security protocols. All personnel would receive enhanced cultural awareness training, with specific modules on how different species approached child rearing and family structures. The station's computer systems would be updated to recognize emergency contact codes from all major military organizations, not just those from species with long-standing presence in the galactic community. And new procedures would be established for handling unaccompanied minors, requiring faster escalation and notification regardless of how composed or capable the child appeared. The security chief also addressed Krikstal directly, commending the agent for following training and maintaining vigilance. Vorn made it clear that the Valerian had not made a mistake in flagging Maya for additional screening. The observations had been reasonable given the cultural context available at the time. The mistake was in the system's failure to provide adequate cultural education and in the delayed notification procedures. Individuals could only work with the tools and training they were given. This public support meant a great deal to Krikstal, who had been worried about facing disciplinary action. The agent thanked Vorn and pledged to become more knowledgeable about human customs and practices. Krikstal also volunteered to help develop the new cultural awareness training, using personal experience with Maya's detention as a teaching example. Sometimes the best lessons came from mistakes, and sharing those lessons could prevent others from repeating them. In the VIP lounge, Maya's shuttle departure time approached. The diplomatic aide informed her that boarding would begin in 15 minutes. Maya thanked Greg for keeping her company and gathered her belongings. The merchant wished her a safe journey and expressed hope that her future travels would go more smoothly. Maya smiled and said she did not mind the occasional delay. Traveling across the galaxy meant encountering different people and different ways of thinking. That was part of what made it interesting. Greg walked with Maya and her escort to the departure gate. Other passengers waiting to board the same shuttle recognized her from the earlier commotion and whispered among themselves. A few looked sympathetic, others curious, and some disapproving of what they had heard about her detention. Maya seemed oblivious to the attention, focused on checking her boarding pass and making sure her backpack was properly secured. Krikstal appeared at the departure gate just before boarding began. The Valerian agent approached Maya hesitantly and apologized for the inconvenience caused by the detention. Maya accepted the apology graciously and repeated what she had said earlier, that Krikstal had just been doing the job properly. She appreciated that the agent took security seriously, because that helped keep everyone safe. Her understanding and lack of resentment touched Krikstal deeply, and the agent's antennae quivered with emotion. The two spoke briefly about cultural differences and how easy it was to misinterpret behavior when you did not understand context. Maya mentioned that her father had taught her about this issue. He often dealt with alien species who misunderstood human actions or were confused by human customs. The key was patience and willingness to explain, rather than getting angry at people for not knowing things they had never been taught. This wisdom from a 10-year-old girl struck Krikstal as profound, and the agent resolved to remember it in future interactions. Boarding began, and Maya said goodbye to both Greg and Krikstal. She walked onto the shuttle with the same calm confidence she had displayed throughout the entire experience. The diplomatic aide accompanied her to ensure she was properly settled. then returned to the station with a report for Administrator Call. The aide described Maya as remarkably mature and completely unbothered by her detention, showing no signs of trauma or distress. If anything, she seemed to have enjoyed the conversation she had while waiting. As the shuttle departed, Crichstyle and Greg stood together watching it leave through the observation window. The merchant remarked that Maya was an impressive young person, and Crichstyle agreed wholeheartedly. 3 hours after Maya's shuttle departed, Administrator Quall received an official communication from the Galactic Transit Authority headquarters. The message was marked priority, which surprised the Zenthi administrator since the incident had been resolved without major complications. Quall opened the message and discovered that Fleet Admiral Collins had already filed his promised report, but the Transit Authority had been examining the issue independently after receiving similar complaints from other stations. Across the network, the communication detailed a pattern that had emerged over the past 2 years. Human military children had been flagged as suspicious at 17 different transit stations in 6 different sectors. In 12 of those cases, the children had been detained for questioning. In 4 cases, the detentions had lasted longer than 3 hours. All incidents had been resolved without harm to the children, but the pattern suggested systemic issues. Rather than isolated misunderstandings, the Transit Authority had launched a comprehensive review of how different stations handled cultural diversity among passengers. Early findings indicated significant gaps in training and awareness, particularly regarding species that had joined the galactic community relatively recently. Humans had been part of interstellar civilization for only 70 years, a brief period compared to most other species. Security personnel trained decades ago often lacked updated information about human customs and practices. Call read through the report with growing concern. The Zenthi administrator had always prided Meridian Station on its professional security operations, but this incident revealed blind spots in their procedures. Cultural awareness training had been generic and infrequent, focusing mainly on major species with long-established presence in galactic society. Newer members like humans received minimal coverage, and specific practices like how different species raised children were barely addressed at all. The Transit Authority communication included new guidelines for handling unaccompanied minors from all species. The guidelines required immediate notification of emergency contacts whenever a child was detained for any reason. They mandated cultural awareness training every 6 months instead of annually. They established maximum detention times for minors based on age and required direct communication with parents or guardians within the first hour of any detention. Call appreciated these improvements but recognized that implementing them would require significant resources and effort. Every security officer on the station would need additional training. Computer systems would need updates to recognize emergency contact codes from dozens of different military organizations. New protocols would need to be written, tested, and integrated into daily operations. The administrator began drafting a response to the Transit Authority, accepting the new guidelines and requesting support for implementation. Meanwhile, Greg Palmer had returned to his original purpose for being on the station. He had business meetings scheduled with several merchants in the commercial sectors, but his mind kept wandering back to his encounter with Maya. The girl's remarkable composure and maturity had impressed him deeply. He mentioned the incident to several business associates, describing how a 10-year-old had handled detention by alien security forces with more grace than many adults would manage. One of Greg's associates, a human woman named Patricia Hughes who ran a shipping company, shared her own story. Her son had been detained at a different station 3 years earlier under similar circumstances. The boy had been traveling alone to visit his mother at a mining facility, and security had questioned why a child was going to an industrial site without adult supervision. The detention had lasted 4 hours before Patricia received notification and could explain the situation. Patricia's story reinforced Greg's belief that Maya's experience was not unique. Human children were regularly misunderstood by alien security personnel, who could not comprehend why humans allowed such young people to travel independently. Patricia suggested that human civilian authorities should work with the Transit Authority to develop better protocols, not just rely on military channels to push for changes. The issue affected civilian families as much as military ones. Back at Firebase Olympus, Maya's shuttle approached the military installation's docking facilities. The base was massive, combining military operations with housing for thousands of personnel and their families. Schools, recreational facilities, medical centers, and shopping areas created a self-contained community in space. The shuttle received priority clearance and docked at a terminal normally reserved for flag officers and VIP visitors. Admiral Collins waited at the docking bay. Having cleared his schedule to meet his daughter personally, several of his command staff stood nearby, curious to see the girl whose detention had prompted their admiral to make what amounted to a formal diplomatic protest. When Maya emerged from the shuttle, she ran to her father and hugged him tightly. The admiral wrapped his arms around her, and for a moment the stern fleet commander disappeared, replaced by a father who had missed his daughter during a long deployment. The reunion was brief and relatively private, with Collins' staff politely turning their attention elsewhere. After a few moments, the admiral and Maya walked together toward the residential sections of the base. He asked about her detention, and she described the experience matter-of-factly. She explained that the security agents had been professional and that she understood why they had concerns. Her father listened carefully, then praised her for handling the situation with maturity and patience. Maya asked if he was angry with the station security. Collins explained that he was not angry with the individuals involved, but frustrated with the systemic failures that had allowed the situation to occur. The security agents had acted reasonably based on their training and cultural knowledge. The problem was that their training had been inadequate and their knowledge incomplete. Fixing those issues would prevent similar incidents in the future, which was more important than assigning blame. This conversation exemplified how Admiral Collins approached most problems. He focused on identifying root causes and implementing solutions rather than getting caught up in emotional reactions or personal grievances. Maya had learned this approach from watching her father throughout her childhood. When problems arose, you analyzed them carefully, determined what could be improved, and worked to make those improvements. Getting angry or upset rarely accomplished anything useful. They reached the family quarters assigned to senior officers, and Maya was delighted to see how spacious they were compared to her aunt's apartment. Admiral Collins explained that his promotion to Fleet Admiral had come with various benefits, including better housing. He showed her to her room, which had been prepared by base personnel according to specifications he had provided. Her favorite books were already shelved, her preferred colors dominated the decor, and a large window provided a spectacular view of the surrounding space. Maya settled in quickly, unpacking her few belongings and familiarizing herself with her new environment. Her father had duty obligations that evening, so she would eat dinner with other military dependents in the youth dining facility. She did not mind eating without him. She had grown accustomed to her father's demanding schedule and understood that commanding a fleet required constant attention and availability. That evening, Maya met several other children at the dining facility. They ranged in age from 7 to 15, all dependents of military personnel stationed at Firebase Olympus. The conversation quickly turned to travel experiences, and Maya mentioned her detention at Meridian Station. Several other children shared similar stories of being questioned or detained at various stations. One boy described being held for 6 hours because security could not understand why a 12-year-old was traveling to an asteroid mining operation. The shared experiences created an instant bond among the children. They understood aspects of life that confused many aliens and sometimes even confused civilian humans. They knew what it meant to say goodbye to a parent leaving for dangerous deployments. They understood moving frequently and making new friends every few years. They recognized that their childhoods were different from typical civilian experiences, but not worse, just different. An older teenager named Kyle, whose mother commanded one of the base's destroyer squadrons, mentioned that he was working on a school project about cultural misunderstandings in the galactic community. He asked if Maya would be willing to share her experience for inclusion in the project. She agreed, and they scheduled a time to record a detailed interview. Kyle explained that his project aimed to document how human military dependents navigated galactic society and what challenges they faced that civilian children did not encounter. Meanwhile, back at Meridian Station, Krikstal had become something of an unexpected celebrity among the security staff. Other agents wanted to hear about the encounter with Fleet Admiral Collins and learn what had been said during the communication. Krikstal described the conversation honestly, emphasizing the Admiral's professionalism and his focus on systemic improvements rather than individual blame. The Valerian agent also shared the conversation with Maya at the departure gate, describing her grace and understanding. Within 48 hours of Maya's detention, the story had spread beyond Meridian Station to reach news networks across multiple sectors. A reporter for the Galactic Communications Network, a Iridian named Shelvek, picked up the story from sources at the Transit Authority. Shelvek recognized the broader implications beyond a single incident and began researching patterns of cultural misunderstandings at transit stations. Throughout the network, the reporter contacted Administrator Call requesting an interview about the incident and the planned procedural improvements. Call agreed, seeing an opportunity to demonstrate Meridian Station's commitment to better cultural awareness. The interview was conducted remotely, with Shelvek asking thoughtful questions about what had happened, why it had happened, and what was being done to prevent similar situations in the future. Call explained the incident carefully, avoiding any language that suggested blame toward individual security personnel. The administrator emphasized that Krixtal and the security team had followed their training appropriately. The problem was not individual failure, but systemic gaps in how the galactic transit system prepared personnel to deal with cultural diversity. The Zenthi administrator described the new guidelines from the Transit Authority and the specific steps Meridian Station was implementing to improve cultural awareness. Shelvek also contacted Fleet Admiral Collins, requesting his perspective on the incident. The Admiral agreed to a brief interview, though he made clear that he was speaking as a concerned parent rather than in his official military capacity. Collins reiterated that he held no ill will toward the security personnel involved and appreciated their diligence. He expressed satisfaction that the Transit Authority was addressing systemic issues, but noted that implementation would be crucial. Guidelines without proper training and resources would accomplish little. The reporter asked Admiral Collins about human, military family culture and why human children seem to travel independently more than children of other species. The Admiral explained that humans valued self-reliance and independence as core cultural principles. Throughout human history, young people had taken on responsibilities and faced challenges that helped them develop into capable adults. Modern human society continued this tradition, adapting it to the realities of interstellar civilization. Collins also addressed the specific context of military families. Service members often deployed to dangerous or remote locations where families could not accompany them. Children needed to be able to travel between civilian areas and military installations to maintain family connections. Teaching them to navigate these journeys independently was both practical necessity and valuable life skill. The alternative would be isolating military personnel from their families for years at a time, which would be harmful to both parents and children. The interview with Admiral Collins provided Shelvek with compelling material for a feature story. The reporter also interviewed Greg Palmer, who provided civilian perspective on human family practices. Greg described how his own children had traveled independently from young ages, visiting grandparents across different star systems and attending educational programs on various worlds. He had never considered this unusual until seeing alien reactions to Maya's solo travel. Shelvek's story was published on the Galactic Communications Network with the headline Cultural Crossroads, When Security Meets Misunderstanding. The piece examined the Maya Collins incident as representative of broader challenges in galactic society. As more species joined the interstellar community, their different customs and practices inevitably created confusion and occasional conflict. The story featured interviews with cultural anthropologists, transit security experts, and family advocates from multiple species. The article sparked widespread discussion across the galactic network. Comment sections filled with people sharing their own experiences of cultural misunderstanding. Some readers criticized transit security for being too cautious, while others defended security personnel for taking their responsibilities seriously. Many readers expressed surprise at human parenting practices, and several human readers responded with detailed explanations of why independence training was considered important in their culture. Few human parents criticized Admiral Collins for being too understanding of the security personnel who had detained his daughter. They argued that 2 hours of detention was excessive regardless of cultural context, and that Maya should not have been held so long without parental notification. These criticisms prompted responses from other humans defending the Admiral's balanced approach and noting that attacking individual security personnel would not improve systemic problems. The discussion expanded beyond the original incident to broader questions about how galactic society handled diversity. Some commenters argued that standardization was necessary, that all species should adopt common practices for raising children to avoid confusion. Others countered that diversity was valuable, and that the solution was better education rather than forced conformity. The debate revealed fundamental tensions about how different cultures should coexist in shared spaces. At Firebase Olympus, Maya had settled into her new routine. She attended school with other military dependents, explored the base facilities, and spent evenings with her father when his schedule allowed. She was aware that her detention had become a news story, but found the attention somewhat puzzling. To her, the experience had been uncomfortable but not traumatic, educational but not exceptional. The fact that adults across the galaxy were debating it seemed disproportionate to what had actually happened. Kyle interviewed Maya for his school project, recording a detailed account of her experience at Meridian Station. She described her observations of the security personnel, her thoughts during detention, and her conversation with her father afterward. Kyle was particularly interested in how she had remained so calm throughout the experience. Maya explained that panicking would not have helped the situation, and her father had taught her that controlling your emotional responses allowed you to think more clearly and act more effectively. The interview recording became part of Kyle's project presentation, which examined how military dependents developed psychological resilience through their unique childhood experiences. His teacher, a civilian contractor who taught social sciences at the base school, was impressed by the research and suggested that Kyle submit the project to an academic journal that published student work. The project provided valuable insights into a subculture within human society that most civilians knew little about. Back at Meridian Station, Krickstall worked with Vorn and a team of training specialists to develop the new cultural awareness curriculum. They started by compiling information about child-rearing practices across major species in the galactic community. The research revealed fascinating diversity. Some species, like the Valerians, kept children under constant supervision until they reached physical maturity. Others, like the Craxians, sent children into wilderness survival training as young as 5 years old. Humans fell somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, teaching independence gradually through age-appropriate challenges. Human children in civilian families might travel alone starting around age 8 or 9 for short distances, with longer journeys becoming common by age 12. Military families often started even earlier due to practical necessity. This information was compiled into training modules that helped security personnel understand what constituted normal behavior for human children at different ages. The training program expanded to cover other cultural differences beyond child rearing. Modules addressed religious practices that might seem unusual, social customs that could be misinterpreted, and communication styles that varied significantly across species. The program emphasized that security personnel should remain vigilant while also considering cultural context when evaluating whether behavior was genuinely suspicious or simply unfamiliar. Krickstall presented the first version of the training to the Gate 47 security team. The presentation included video of Maya's detention, clips from Admiral Collins's interview, and analysis of what went right and wrong and how the situation was handled. The Valerian agent used personal experience to illustrate how easy it was to misinterpret behavior through the lens of your own cultural assumptions. The presentation was well received, and several agents asked thoughtful questions about how to balance security concerns with cultural sensitivity. Administrator Quall attended the presentation and was impressed by its quality and thoughtfulness. The Zenthi administrator authorized expansion of the training program to all security personnel on the station and shared the materials with other transit station administrators. Within weeks, Meridian Station's cultural awareness training became a model that other stations adapted for their own use. The Transit Authority formally recognized Krickstall's contribution to improving security protocols across the network. The Valerian agent received a commendation and a promotion to senior security specialist, with new responsibilities including ongoing development and delivery of cultural training. Krickstall felt proud of this recognition but also humbled by it. 4 months after the incident at Meridian Station, the Galactic Diplomatic Academy added a new case study to its curriculum. Professor Hendrik Laurent, a human who taught cross-cultural communication at the Academy, had followed the Maya Collins story with great interest. He recognized it as a perfect example of how good intentions and proper procedures could still lead to problematic outcomes when cultural context was missing. Laurent developed a comprehensive case study that presented students with the scenario of Maya's detention without initially revealing the outcome. Students were asked to analyze the security team's decision-making, identify potential cultural factors at play, and propose how the situation should be handled. The exercise revealed that even students specifically trained in diplomatic and cultural matters often struggled to recognize all the relevant cultural dimensions of what seemed like a straightforward security decision. After students worked through the scenario, Laurent revealed what actually happened and facilitated discussion about the lessons learned. He emphasized that Krikstal and the security team had not acted maliciously or incompetently. They had made reasonable decisions based on available information and training. The problem was systemic, not individual. This distinction was crucial for future diplomats to understand, as it affected how they approached problem-solving in cross-cultural contexts. The professor also used Admiral Collins's response as an example of effective diplomatic communication. The admiral had been firm about identifying procedural failures while avoiding personal attacks on the individuals involved. He had pushed for systemic improvements while acknowledging the good intentions of the security personnel. This balanced approach achieved meaningful change without creating unnecessary conflict or damaging relationships between human and alien communities. Students at the Academy came from dozens of different species, and their discussions of the case study revealed how differently various cultures viewed the central issues. Some students from species with protective child-rearing practices sympathized with Krikstal's initial concerns. Others from cultures that valued early independence thought the detention was obviously inappropriate. The discussions helped students understand that their own cultural backgrounds shaped their perceptions in ways they often did not recognize. One student, a young Zenthi named Pell, wrote a thesis analyzing the Maya Collins incident in the context of broader patterns of cultural conflict in galactic society. Pell argued that as the galactic community expanded to include more species, the potential for cultural misunderstanding increased exponentially. Traditional approaches to security and governance assumed a certain degree of cultural homogeneity that no longer existed. New frameworks were needed that explicitly accounted for cultural diversity rather than treating it as an exception to normal procedures. The thesis received high marks and was published in an academic journal focused on interspecies relations. Pell's analysis caught the attention of policymakers at the Galactic Council, who were grappling with exactly the kinds of challenges the thesis addressed. The council invited Pell to present findings at a special session on cultural diversity in shared spaces. The young Zenthi's presentation sparked serious discussion about whether current governance structures were adequate for an increasingly diverse galactic community. Meanwhile, at Firebase Olympus, Maya's life had settled into comfortable patterns. She excelled in her studies, made friends among the other military dependents, and spent quality time with her father when his duties allowed. The incident at Meridian Station had become just one story among many in her young life, notable but not defining. She occasionally thought about Krikstal and wondered how the cultural awareness training was progressing, but mostly she focused on present activities and future possibilities. Admiral Collins watched his daughter thrive and felt grateful for the time they had together. His career demanded frequent deployments and long absences from family life. These periods when Maya lived with him on base were precious and temporary. He knew that within a year or two she would need to return to civilian space for educational opportunities, not available on military installations. The separation was inevitable and necessary, but that did not make it easier. The Admiral had been monitoring the broader response to the Meridian Station incident with quiet satisfaction. The changes implemented at transit stations across the network represented genuine progress in how galactic society handled cultural diversity. His official report had contributed to these changes, but the real credit belonged to people like Krikstal, who had turned the experience into opportunity for growth. Collins had learned long ago that the best leaders were those who could acknowledge mistakes and work to prevent their repetition. Back at Meridian Station, the Cultural Awareness Program had become integrated into routine operations. New security personnel received the training as part of their initial orientation. Experienced agents completed refresher modules every 6 months. The station maintained a database of cultural practices and customs that personnel could consult when encountering unfamiliar behaviors. The system was not perfect and misunderstandings still occurred, but their frequency and severity had decreased noticeably. Crichton had become the station's informal expert on cultural matters, and other agents frequently consulted the Valerian when uncertain about how to interpret passenger behavior. The agent enjoyed this role and continued learning about different species and their practices. Crichton had developed relationships with cultural representatives from various communities, creating a network of contacts who could provide quick answers to questions about specific customs or traditions. One day, about 5 months after the original incident, Crichton was working at the Gate 47 checkpoint when a familiar face appeared in the security queue. Maya Collins stood in line, once again traveling alone to Firebase Olympus. She had been visiting her aunt during a school break and was returning to the base. When she reached the checkpoint, she smiled at Crichton in recognition. The Valerian agent scanned Maya's credentials, which now processed smoothly through the updated system. The emergency contact codes were immediately recognized, and a notification was automatically sent to Admiral Collins's command staff confirming his daughter's location and estimated arrival time. The entire process took less than 30 seconds, and Maya passed through the checkpoint without any additional screening or questions. As Maya walked toward her departure gate, she turned back and waved at Crichton. The agent waved back, feeling a sense of completion. This was how the process should work, efficient and respectful, accounting for both security needs and cultural context. The difference between Maya's 2 transits through the station demonstrated how much had changed in just a few months. The story of that second, uneventful transit spread through the station's security network almost as quickly as the first incident had. Personnel who had been skeptical about the value of cultural awareness training saw concrete evidence of its effectiveness. The new protocols and updated systems had turned what would have been another detention into a smooth, routine security screening. This practical demonstration of success strengthened support for continued investment in cultural education. Administrator Call compiled a detailed report on the improvements implemented at Meridian Station and their measurable effects. The report showed significant reductions in detention times for passengers flagged for additional screening, fewer complaints about cultural insensitivity, and improved satisfaction ratings from travelers of all species. The data supported the argument that investing in cultural awareness improved both security, effectiveness, and passenger experience. The Transit Authority used Call's report as evidence when advocating for expanded cultural awareness programs at stations throughout the network. Some station administrators resisted, arguing that the programs were expensive and time-consuming to implement. However, the data from Meridian Station demonstrated clear benefits that justified the investment. Gradually, more stations adopted similar programs, each adapted to their specific contexts and passenger populations. Human diplomatic representatives had been monitoring these developments with approval. They recognized that the changes benefited not just human travelers but members of all species, who might be misunderstood due to cultural differences. The improvements represented the kind of practical progress that strengthened interspecies cooperation more effectively than grand diplomatic declarations or formal treaties. Greg Palmer, the merchant who had witnessed Maya's original detention, passed through Meridian Station regularly in his business travels. He noticed the changes in how security personnel interacted with passengers and asked about them during one transit. A security officer explained the Cultural Awareness Program and its origins in the Maya Collins incident. Greg smiled, pleased to learn that the uncomfortable situation he had witnessed had led to meaningful improvements. The merchant shared this information with Patricia Hughes, whose son had also been detained years earlier. Patricia was gratified to learn that other children would face fewer difficulties because of the changes implemented. She reached out to other human parents whose children traveled frequently. 7 years passed after the incident at Meridian Station, and Maya Collins was now 17 years old. She stood at a crossroads in her life, preparing to make decisions about her future career and education. Admiral Collins had been promoted again and now served on the Strategic Command Council at Earth, coordinating fleet operations across multiple sectors. Maya had spent the past 2 years at a prestigious academy on Earth, excelling academically while exploring various possible career paths. The decision before her was significant. She could follow her father's path into military service, applying to the Naval Academy where she would almost certainly be accepted based on her academic record and family background. Alternatively, she could pursue civilian education and career options that interested her deeply. The choice was complicated by the fact that both paths held genuine appeal for different reasons. Maya spent weeks researching options, talking with advisors and reflecting on her experiences growing up in the military community. She thought often about that day at Meridian Station, the incident that had seemed so minor at the time but had sparked such significant changes. The memory had taken on new meaning as she matured and understood more about the broader context and implications. One evening, Maya sat with her father in their apartment near Strategic Command Headquarters. They discussed her future plans, with Admiral Collins careful not to push her toward any particular choice. He believed strongly that young people should make their own decisions about their lives, even when parents had clear preferences. He shared his perspective when asked, but emphasized that Maya's happiness and fulfillment mattered more than following family tradition. Maya told her father that she had decided to pursue diplomacy rather than military service. She wanted to study interspecies relations and cultural communication at the Galactic Diplomatic Academy. The decision had crystallized when she reconnected with the story of Krixtal and the changes that followed her detention. She realized that she wanted to work on the kinds of problems that incident had highlighted, finding ways to help different cultures understand each other better and resolve conflicts peacefully. Admiral Collins listened to his daughter's explanation with pride and full support. He noted that diplomacy and military service were not as different as many people assumed. Both involved representing humanity's interests. Both required understanding complex situations and making difficult decisions, and both served important purposes in maintaining peace and security. The skills Maya had developed growing up in military communities would serve her well in diplomatic work. The conversation shifted to practical matters of application and preparation. Maya had already begun the preliminary application process for the Galactic Diplomatic Academy, which accepted students from across the galaxy for intensive training in cross-cultural communication, negotiation, and conflict resolution. Admission was highly competitive, but Maya's unique background and clear sense of purpose would strengthen her application. Several months later, Maya received her acceptance to the academy. She arrived on the campus, located on a neutral station in deep space, and immediately felt the diversity of the student body. Her classmates came from dozens of different species, each bringing their own perspectives and experiences. During orientation, Professor Laurent gave a welcome address that mentioned the importance of learning from real-world examples of cultural interaction and misunderstanding. Maya's first week at the academy included introduction to the core curriculum. When she received her course materials for cross-cultural communication, she was surprised to find a case study titled Security and Cultural Context. The Meridian Station Incident. He read through the materials and realized with a mix of embarrassment and pride that her own experience had become a teaching tool for future diplomats. Professor Laurent approached Maya after class when he learned that she was the subject of the case study. He asked if she would be willing to participate in a discussion session when students analyzed the incident. Maya agreed, curious about how others would interpret an experience she remembered so clearly. The professor emphasized that her participation was optional and that she should only share what she felt comfortable discussing. The class session arrived 2 weeks later. Professor Laurent presented the scenario to students without initially revealing that one of their classmates was directly involved. Students analyzed the security team's decisions, debated cultural factors, and proposed alternative approaches. Maya listened to her peers discuss her detention from various perspectives, finding their insights both fascinating and occasionally surprising. Some students criticized Krixtal harshly, arguing that the detention was obviously inappropriate and reflected poor training. Others defended the Valerian agent's caution, Noting that security personnel faced impossible choices when trying to balance safety and cultural sensitivity, a few students suggested that the real problem was human parenting practices, and that adapting to galactic norms would prevent such incidents. When Professor Laurent revealed that Maya was present in the class, the room fell silent. Students who had just criticized various aspects of the incident suddenly seemed uncomfortable, worried they had said something offensive. Maya smiled and assured them that she appreciated hearing honest analysis. She explained that she had been thinking about that day for years, and hearing different perspectives helped her understand it more fully. Maya shared her memories of the detention, describing what she had been thinking and feeling at the time. She explained that she had not been frightened, because her father had taught her that most people acted with good intentions, even when they made mistakes. She had understood, even at 10 years old, that the security personnel were trying to keep people safe, and that her situation genuinely looked suspicious from their cultural perspective. The discussion that followed was rich and nuanced. Students asked Maya questions about human military family culture, about how she had developed such maturity at a young age, and about what she thought could have prevented the misunderstanding. Her answers provided insights that the written case study could not capture. She emphasized that the incident's positive outcome depended on people choosing understanding over anger and focusing on improvement rather than blame. One student, a Craxian named Vex who had been particularly critical of Crixtal during the initial discussion, apologized to Maya for harsh comments. Maya appreciated the apology but explained that she agreed with some of Vex's criticisms. The procedures at Meridian Station had been inadequate, and children should not be detained for hours without parental notification. Acknowledging those failures was important for ensuring they were corrected. The class session became one of the most memorable of Maya's first semester. Her classmates treated her differently afterward, not with pity or excessive deference, but with respect for her willingness to share personal experience for educational purposes. Several students approached her privately to discuss their own experiences with cultural misunderstanding, creating connections that deepened into friendships. Maya excelled at the academy over the following years. Her unique background provided perspectives that enriched classroom discussions and group projects. She focused her studies on practical approaches to reducing cultural conflict in shared spaces, like transit stations, trading posts, and mixed settlements. Her senior thesis examined how relatively small investments in cultural education could prevent cascading problems in interspecies relations. During her final year, Maya learned that Crixtal had been invited to speak at the academy about the cultural awareness programs implemented at Meridian Station. Maya attended the presentation and approached the Valerian agent afterward. They had not communicated in years beyond occasional brief messages, and both had changed considerably since their first meeting. Crixtal barely recognized the confident young woman before her as the calm 10-year-old from years ago. Maya had grown into a poised and articulate advocate for cross-cultural understanding. The two spoke for over an hour, discussing how their lives had been shaped by that brief encounter at Gate 47. Crixtal expressed gratitude for Maya's grace in handling the detention and its aftermath. Maya thanked the agent for having the courage to turn a mistake into an opportunity for positive change. Their conversation touched on the broader impact of the incident. The cultural awareness programs that began at Meridian Station had spread to hundreds of transit facilities across the galaxy. Thousands of security personnel had received training that helped them better understand diverse passengers. Countless potential misunderstandings had been prevented or resolved more quickly because people had learned from what happened to Maya Collins. After graduating from the academy, Maya accepted a position with the Galactic Transit Authority's Cultural Liaison Division. Her work involved developing policies and training programs that helped transit facilities serve diverse populations more effectively. She traveled extensively, visiting stations throughout the network and consulting with administrators about specific challenges they faced. One of her first major projects was coordinating with military organizations across multiple species to develop standardized protocols for children traveling to visit parents at military installations.